Evening all. Would you believe episode 31, been a busy week once again in property in WA, and everybody I talk to, whether it be real estate agents, settlement agents, bankers, finance brokers, all going through the same little drama with regard to anxiety and stresses and pressure, and we're all doing our thing. But it's exciting times. It's fabulous for everybody, because don't forget the property market here in WA for the last 4 or 5 years has perhaps been very different to what it has been on the East Coast. And that's the purpose of why Property Avenue WA was introduced. We've decided there was something missing for the WA market, and hence what we do. And you'll notice I'm on my own this week. My little buddy is off doing some school things with the kids. And so family comes first, as we all say. And so, and unfortunately, we weren't able to arrange the guest that we were planning to have. So you've got me. So with regard to what Property Avenue WA, if you're a first timer, we ask you to ask your questions. We're live, so we welcome you to be a part of playing a part and asking your questions. That's what we're here for. The focus is on Western Australia and property in Western Australia. No specific place. It's about Western Australia. It's presented to you by Champion Based Settlements and dedicated to property management, which is Oscar, the two respective businesses that Oscar and I are involved in. So we have a fair background with regard to property and a range of matters. Tonight, I'm just going to touch on a few things that probably won't be as long as we normally are, but because Oscar takes up a lot of time. But we're going to make reference to a couple of things that we've noticed this week on special conditions on contracts that's been brought to my attention. A couple of mythbusters that brought to our attention this week, and I thought, why not have a mythbuster? Because there's always a few myths that create a bit of discussion, and not always are they correct. Rental yield. There's a question asked to me this week about rental yield. What's it mean? What does that do? What does that say? So we'll just touch on the definition. Perhaps when Oscar is back next week, we will expand on a little bit more. And also with regard to investment in property, it's interesting. Part of my business outside our settlement agency, I have a consulting business, and I look after clients with regard to their property matters and inquiries and things of that nature. And I have noticed clients who are inquiring from the East Coast, some from WA, but also from the East Coast, looking at investing in property. Doesn't have a good record. Maybe we just touch on that and give you my opinion of what I think about when it comes to property investment. And buying with family members. There was an article in the paper I noticed this week about buying with family members, which is along the lines of similar to, and I promise I'm going to keep hounding the girls. So I'd love to get them on board from Mortgage Mates and have a chat to them about what Mortgage Mates is about. But buying with other family members, is it an option? And it certainly is an option. And we will just touch on that and perhaps create that discussion for another day, but certainly touch on it. And what I have got, you think Oscar is the only one that provides stats, but I've been able to get access. Okay, he emailed them to me, but we'll give you some stats about what's going on. So we invite you to ask your questions. We welcome them. Be a part, be involved, because I don't enjoy just talking to myself. So we'll see how we go, although some people may not agree with that. Been a great week, been a really interesting week, but having a look at the stats this week with regard to property sales, 4 weeks ago, the advice I've got is that 916 sales occurred in Perth, in the Perth market. This week it was 877, of which 638 of those were houses, 149 units, 90 were land. So I think the land might have dropped off a little bit because of the timeframes. But even so, that's still good numbers. Same time last year was 817. But I think Oscar has touched on this before. We need to be careful with the stats. And as we always used to say when we were playing sport, and a well-known hockey coach was one, Rick Charlesworth used to say, look behind the scoreboard. And I think that's where we need to be aware of when it comes to stats. When you have a look at the stats, also what is available out there, and there's still a very, very, very busy market. And so, as I say, those stats. Property listed 4 weeks ago was 10,372. At the moment, as of this week, it was 10,235, of which a large proportion of that, over half, is housing. Then there's about another 2,500 in units, and then there's about 2,500 blocks of land, vacant blocks of land that are listed for sale. So interesting. Same time last year, there were 14,392 properties listed for sale. So that's close to a $4,000. Well, it is a $4,000 difference. $4,000 in numbers differential. So it's there's not anywhere near as many properties listed for sale as there was. And that's what we're talking about, supply and demand. A snapshot with regard to what's going on with the Perth market, the rental market, that is still busy. And I read somewhere, I can't recall exactly my source, but I read somewhere where, they're referring to crisis and some of the things that are occurring with regard to the rental market. It is still continually be very, very difficult. And I read, now where did I read? I read an article, it might have been the West Australian on the weekend, where there was a comment made, which I had a bit of a chuckle, where it made reference to the fact that poor students might be sleeping on grandma's floor, because it's true. As silly as that may sound, it's going to be difficult for uni students and people like that coming to Perth in particular, looking for rentals, because this is, between now and the next month or two, that's when people start looking. It might get to the point where people decide, hey, we're going to buy rather than rental, because we can't buy rental for our son or our daughter when they come down to Perth for rental for uni. So that will have an impact. So 800 rentals. This is Perth, by the way. 800 rentals were rented this week. 4 weeks ago, it was 792. Same time last week, it was 982. So again, we need to be careful with these stats, that although 982 last year, same time last year, we've got to remember too that the numbers that are available at the moment is a far different. So it's a little bit harder to find a place. And I know ourselves, personal experience, that we have had inquiries with some property that we have, and it has been crazy, absolutely crazy. Properties available for rent at the moment is 2,864 in the whole of Perth. That's 1,500 in houses and 1,300 in units. And 4 weeks ago, it was 2,854. So not much of a difference really. There's a slight increase, but it's still not good. Same time last year, same week last year, 6,151. So it's just telling you where we are at with regard to the rentals market here in WA. It is very, very difficult. And so if you are looking for rental, there's some of the people we've had on board. We've discussed what can and can't be done as far as rentals are concerned. Get all your ducks in line, as we say. Get information together. Ensure your application and all the other information you can provide, a bit like a CV when you're applying for a job. The better your CV is, the better your application is, or as much information as you can provide, the better it will give you for a chance, an opportunity to get a look in. I can't emphasise that enough. And the property manager we've had on as guests, including Oscar, which that's his field, take their advice. Whether you're going privately, you're going to rent a place privately, or you're intending to go via a real estate agent, a property manager, then get all your information together, because it's just not going to work otherwise. It's simple as that. There's a process, and you need to follow that process. And if you can add more information and assist with that, with your application for those that are reviewing it, then you're doing yourself a favour. And I can't give you any more information than that. One of the things that I was really intrigued about, the question that was asked of me during the week, was a question about rental yield. We're talking about rentals, and we're talking about investment property. And the question was asked, what's a rental yield? What's that mean? We'll obviously check this a little bit more again when Oscar is back on board as far as that's concerned. But the rental yield is, in simple terms, and I checked the actual correct definition, if you like. Rental yield is where you divide the annual rent the rental income you receive on a property by your actual sales investment. So what I'm saying is that if you're getting $20,000 rent for the year on your property, and you bought the property for $430,000, you divide that the value of that that rent into the value of your property, and that will give you a rental yield. And generally, what is considered a good rental yield on an investment property is about 5% plus. So if you're getting a rental yield of some 5%, 6%, 7% on your rental property, then you're in the ballpark, and you've got a good investment. The actual rental yield with regard to that, I hope that answers some of the questions that people ask me during the week. But the higher the rental yield you receive, obviously what that means is that you're going to have a better cash flow. So then you're getting into a better position, and particularly if you're doing it for investment, particularly if you're a retiree. And let's be honest, if you've got money in the bank at the moment, your rental yield is not very good. But if so, it's an opportunity, and we've only been saying the last few weeks they're slowly starting to see a few investors, property investors, getting back into the market. It's been a bit slow, and that's probably also having an impact on what's available in the rental market. But if you're entertaining or considering investing in property, look, generally my opinion is, and I've been involved in investment property for a long time, and obviously in my profession, I assist clients with what in that area. But your property's been pretty solid and pretty good. It has its moments, but even when it comes to rental, you'll hear some bad stories, but they're not all bad stories. There are still some good stories, and it all is to do with regard to having good tenants, having a good location, and buying the right property that suits you for what you want and your needs. But certainly it is an area that there's an opportunity out there at the moment. Values still, in our observation, don't appear to have gone silly. I think we made comment last week. There was an article in one of the papers identifying, ANZ had identified that WA was perhaps, or Perth in particular, was considered to be, in 2021, to be perhaps the leader of the capital cities in Australia, and they are predicting an increase in values of around about 12%. We think it might be a little bit higher than that, but even so, that was an interesting observation, considering what the banks were perhaps promoting only a few months ago. It was quite a negative sort of reporting. And so it's very interesting as to what they're now seeing and where they're seeing Perth and WA. Certainly in my case, I'm having no shortage of clients who are contacting me from the East Coast, inquiring and engaging me to assist them on a consulting basis, which is what I do. And certainly we're looking at a few opportunities around here in the metro area here, but there's also people looking for opportunities in the country centres, the regional areas, which gets me to another point when we talk about yield. In fact, before we do that, just when we also refer to a rental yield, it's interesting too. You've got a net yield where that is a net yield is after you take into consideration all your expenses. So you're taking into maintenance, you're taking into consideration insurance, you're taking into consideration your property management fees. So all those sort of things will come into play to maintain and have that property, and then you will have your net yield. Your gross yield is just that. It's the rental that you receive, the annual rental you receive against the value of your property that you've purchased. So for those that are looking and those that are considering investment, it's something to consider, and certainly something you would discuss perhaps with your accountant or even your financial planner. And certainly something when you're talking to a real estate agent, they will obviously be able to provide you with some assistance of that sort of information. As I say, getting back to real estate and investment in real estate, I spoke just a moment ago with regard to property in regional areas and investment opportunities. There is, and I just got a message from Faye, one of our regulars. Hi, Faye, thank you, and I'll answer your question in one moment. The rental properties, they identified outside of the Perth area. Port Hedland is considered one of is considered number one, in fact, as far as rental yields concerned in the current market. Karratha follows closely a second. And then we've got Kalgoorlie, Boulder, Broome, and then Geraldton. So they're all above the 5%. Port Hedland's leading quite significantly. I did have that figure somewhere and I misplaced it. But Broome, Port Hedland was significant, but they do have high rentals. Their rental history, although it's not at those levels just yet, some of the feedback I've had from some of my clients up there, it's starting to creep up there again. And, you know, nothing to be paying $1,000 a week for a rental property. That includes Karratha and Port Hedland. But I might add too, one of the observations is that there are less people fly in, fly out, which used to be the case. And obviously with the restrictions, both internationally and also at state level, our fly in, fly outers are camping in WA, and that's also putting pressure on the rental market. And certainly that would be the case in places like Port Hedland and Karratha, and Kalgoorlie to that point, because they are big mining areas. Geraldton is more diversified, but certainly has no shortage. I think last week I don't have the figures this week, but last week there was only 62 rentals available in the whole of Geraldton. That's housing units, whatever else may be, probably include tents for that matter. But yeah, so it's and Broome. Where did I read that the observation from someone up north was the fact that Broome had probably come into that category. There's no real major industry in Broome, but perhaps people are, while they can travel in WA, and that's about the only travel we have been able to do until late. People have perhaps gone to Broome and go, hey, this is not a bad spot. I like this. Maybe I stay here. I can work from home. I don't need to be in an office. And away we go. And then all of a sudden like the lifestyle. So there's all those things that come into play, but it's an interesting time as far as that's concerned. So that's the story with regard to rental. That gives you some insight about rental yield, but it also gives you an insight that not only Perth is an opportunity when it comes to investment and rental opportunities, but people are certainly seeing opportunities in the regional areas. And as I say, Port Hedland, Karratha, Kalgoorlie, Boulder, Broome and Geraldton all come into, categorised as the top 5 at the moment when it comes to the rental yield, which is an important factor if you're investing in property. We will definitely talk more about investment in property and talk to Oscar next week, because obviously that's his field with regard to property management, and we'll discuss rental yields. So that's the story as far as rental yields. Faye has just sent me a question, and I will. When residents take over a body corporate from original owners, I'm not quite sure. What you mean, Faye, when you say residents take over a body corporate from regional owners, is there a 12 months wait? I'm not sure. I may need to clarify that exactly what you mean in that question. The owners, with regard to a strata, this is obviously to do with the strata property. You will have what they call a strata management. And then you will have the council of owners. So I'm not quite sure what you mean with regard to residents can take over a body corporate from regional owners. I'll have to check that and maybe speak to you separately, because I'm unsure. But by all means, you're more than welcome to send me through further question or further explanation, and I'll see if I can answer it for you. As we say, you ask your property questions, and it's our role to try and discover the answers. Investment in property, does it have a good record? Yeah, I think it does. Perhaps we've lost a few investors in recent times for one reason or another, but I think at the market at the moment, low interest rates, opportunity, there's certainly a good rental market. This is Oscar and I, we are of the opinion we don't see that slowing down for a while yet. And already, as I said, ANZ, we're already predicting that Perth is going to be probably the leader of the pack when it comes to the capital cities around Australia. So, I think there's an opportunity. It's still affordable. You've got to be quick, and you need to get hold of your real estate agent and liaise with them closely if you are looking. I think it is. I think if you do it right, you pick the right locations, and you, when you consider what return you're getting, money in the bank at the moment, I think there's an opportunity here. I know we had Michael Keel on as a guest a few episodes ago, and Michael emphasised at the time, and even since we had Michael on, things have increased a bit. But as he pointed out, it's not a short-term thing with property investment. It's not something that you can do and say, well, I'll invest for 6 months and then I'll get out, because you've got to consider the cost to get in. And when I say cost to get in, I mean your biggest cost when you're buying property is stamp duty. And then when you're selling, you've got agents' fees and various other costs to get out. So, there's those costs to get in and get out before you even consider what profit you make. So it is a longer term thing. But if you do it right and you're there for the longer haul, I certainly know of people who were concerned about the market 2 or 3 years ago, understandably so, because we didn't know what was going on. For that matter, come March and April, there was some concern of, we're in that world of the unknown. But for those that hung in there, I think they are about to get a little bit of return back. And when I say return, there's some benefits when it comes to the rental income that sort of dropped off a little bit in recent times. That now will change. It's just the supply and demand. And as much as people think, oh, well, the landlord's being greedy, it's not really a case of being greedy. Perhaps there are some in some pockets. Let's not kid ourselves. But the landlords have been doing it pretty hard for a while. Now, not everybody's going to agree with that comment, but to be honest, they are, because they've had loans to worry about. There's no guarantees. Not all landlords have had tenants, and no guarantees. Tenants have had choices. They can go from one property to the other because there was supply. Now there's a demand coming to the place, and all of a sudden it's in the landlords are in the driver's seat, albeit with the moratorium, which the Real Estate Institute of WA have not been supportive of, and I totally get that too, is the fact that, the landlords are still under duress with the fact that this moratorium restricts them with the current lease in place until the 31st of March to do anything about that lease. So, everything's catered for the tenant. And again, not everybody's going to agree with what I'm saying, but at the end of the day, come the 31st of March, that will give landlords an opportunity. If you've got a new property or a new lease, sure, you can structure your lease accordingly, and you can structure your rental or your rent accordingly. You're not controlled by the moratorium. But for those that already have an existing lease, you're very much controlled by the moratorium until the 31st of March. So they are things to be considered, but it is an opportunity. If there's any other questions you have with regard to rental property or investment in property, by all means, let us know. You've got to consider, do you have the resources to buy the property, or are you going to borrow? Once upon a time, there used to be a lot of commentary about negative gearing, whereas that now, I think there's more emphasis on positive gearing, and particularly if you're retired, you're looking at what your rental income is going to be, and that's what Faye's just responded. Now I get what Faye's saying. Okay, so where was I? Yes, with regard to rental property or investment property, you need to be conscious of what you're doing. You need to be conscious of how you're going to go about it. And certainly the rental income at the moment will give you perhaps a better return on your money than what you're getting, as I said, in the bank. There are other investment opportunities, of course, outside property, but as we emphasise, it's not a short-term fix. It's something that you perhaps look at for a longer term. What longer term means to you is probably different to what others think, but I would suggest that you're probably looking at least a 5-year period when it comes to return. But again, it's something you talk to your accountant about. Look at your structures, talk to your financial planner, and consider all those things before you just jump in without any thought. Really important. The article I saw the other day was buying with other family members is an option. And I found that really interesting because I'm really keen. And Jess, if you are watching, or if you do end up watching this program, we'd love to get you on board to discuss Mortgage Mates. I really am intrigued, and I think it's a fabulous concept. And if you've not heard of Mortgage Mates, look it up. I'm I get their newsletter, etc., and it's a really interesting concept. A couple of ladies have got together and created this concept, and it's just sort of from what I'm reading and what I'm following, they are going gangbusters. So it's exciting stuff. But buying with other family members is an option. Absolutely, it is, and it's something that can be entertained. Interestingly enough, my two elder sons at one point, but they were renting a place, and I suggested at the time maybe, and it was also at the time when they could get a government grant, the first home buyers grant, not just the stamp duty exemption, but actually receive money when you buy. You got a grant when you bought an established home. The thing that I would suggest when you do that again is that if that's going to be the case, you need to decide what you're going to do income-wise and how it's going to be done. Is it going to be done? Are you going to buy that property as tenants in common, or are you going to buy that property as joint tenants? There is a difference, and we've discussed joint tenancy and tenancy in common in previous shows. And briefly, tenants in common is where you both have a respective share. So if I'm going to put in a bigger deposit, or I have the ability to borrow more, so therefore my contribution is more than my brother's, or my sister for that matter, then perhaps my share, when I say my share, my holding is I might have 65%, and my brother might only have 35% because he's got a smaller loan or he's contributing less money. But it's something, they are things you need to consider. So that's tenants in common. And also what means tenants in common is you have a specific share. So you have a half share, 65, 35, whatever the case may be. And as tenants in common, if something happens to one of you, so if you have an accident, you have a death, so one of you dies in an accident or whatever the case may be, then your share is left to whoever it is you want to leave it to under your will. It's really important. And what that means is if you're going to buy a property with your brother or your sister, then important that you get a will. In fact, you both get a will to identify. However, if you are buying that property as joint tenants, then as joint tenants, it comes under what they call the survivorship rule. So if one of you has an accident and dies, get killed, whatever the case may be, and your property, whatever you say in your will is well and good, but the property as such is left to the surviving party. So my brother and I have a property together as joint tenants. If something happens to me, my share in the property, my half share, because it's half share, there's no 60-40 or anything of that nature. So my half share under the survivorship rule goes automatically to my brother. Now there's a process to do that, but it overrides the will. Okay, so there's no questions. So it is important to identify if you're going to buy a property, particularly with a family member or a mate, you identify how you're going to buy that when it comes to tenancy, joint tenants or tenants in common. Got any questions? Always welcome to ask, all right? But it's really important you clarify that, and it's important that you let the real estate agent know what your intentions are with regard to that, because if it's not done at the time that you do your contract, it can cost money. So yeah, it's a great option, and it's something worthwhile doing and entertaining in this current market, and it may give you a leg into the property. It may give you an opportunity to get into the property market that you perhaps can't do or wouldn't normally be able to do on your own. So it's certainly something to entertain. And I think we've also touched on recently about mum and dad banks, which I still want to have that as a separate topic in itself in the coming episodes. But the mum and dad bank is also another option. I read an article again a few weeks ago where, again, we emphasise the return on people's money in the bank. It's just the way it is. Low interest rates for lending means low interest rates when you bank your money on your deposit, and it's less than 1% at the moment. So the option is that you could possibly, mum or grandma or grandpa or whatever, may assist in providing the finance. Now, again, the bankers might not like what I'm saying, the finance brokers might not like what I'm saying, but we've got to look at all things in property, not just one-dimensional. And so that may be an ideal investment opportunity. And it may also be a situation where you're not quite got everything in place to be able to get a bank loan. There's another opportunity. But it works both ways, because what you can then do is the Reserve Bank rate is something like 0.025 or whatever it may be. You could then put a margin on that. So when I say you can, I'm talking about mum or dad or grandma or grandpa. They could then put, or a rich uncle, they could then put a margin on that reserve bank rate, maybe 2%, maybe 2.5%. But your son or your daughter or your grandchild will still be well and truly in front because it's a good rate, and yet grandma and grandpa or mum and dad are going to get a good return on their money, their investment. Again, very, very important. Even though it's family, it's really important to put things in place, get all the legalities done, do a legal document, do a loan agreement. All it is, there's no different to a bank. It's just mum and dad bank rather than National Bank or Bank West or Commonwealth or whatever else it may be, Westpac. So they are things that to be considered, and they are not altogether extreme. It is not a difficult process, and I've got a couple of clients that I've been assisting with that we have done that, and it's still progressing, but it's done. It can be done, and it's just a case of dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and it's an option that certainly can be entertained. Faye, going back to your question, Faye asked a question earlier on regarding body corporates and strata, and so what Faye was meaning was the strata body corporation is currently run by the company who built the villas, and the owners who have bought the individual villas are wondering if we can run our own strata body corporate. You can. So what happens, Faye, is you have a special meeting. So once that is done, the developers don't always want to retain the ownership or running the strata. So that's where you create a council of owners, and you will then also have a property manager, a strata manager. Now that often is real estate firms have their own strata management businesses, and then you've also got strata management businesses that are standalone. So there's a couple of options that are available, but it's certainly something that Faye, as I know who you are and client of ours, you're more than welcome. I can look into that a bit more and give you some more information. But for those that are inquiring about something of that nature, when you're buying off a development which is a strata, the developers normally get everything in place, and then in very simple terms, and we will, in fact, I will jot this down because we will, it's a very interesting conversation, and it is probably not that simple to answer just in very quickly, but we will ensure that we have a section, an episode with regard to, or at least part episode about stratas and the owners and how those things all work. So in fact, I'm really keen. There's been some strata reform, and we will get a bit of a guru. He probably doesn't know I'm going to contact him yet, but there's a chap by the name of Matt Ellis who is very, very good in this area, and we'll see if we can't get Matty along as a guest one night and see if he would perhaps we can extend on that phase. So great question, really like those. So we'll follow that up. Look, the other thing was that we touched on, and I said we'd talk about tonight before we come to an end, is a bit of a Mythbusters. A couple of things that were brought to my attention, which I was really quite surprised about. One was about rent, and it was really interesting, and this is where social media can sometimes get a little bit carried away, but I picked up on the fact that someone made comment that the real estate agent, now I'm not a real estate agent, so I am at arm's length. My business is totally independent. It's a business that my dad and I created some 40 years ago, and it's a family business and continues to be so. So I've got no affiliation. I'm not paid by real estate agents. I'm not affiliated with any real estate firm. So my comments are my comments, my observations. But I can tell you I've been involved in finance and been involved in real estate matters and property matters for a damn long time. When it comes to rental increases, the myth was the real estate agent gets the surplus or whatever the case may be. Could not be further from the truth. It is a situation where whatever the real estate agent does when it comes to rental arrangements and promoting, they are acting for the owner of the property. So we were talking about earlier on about investors and investment property. People sometimes, in my case, my wife and I manage our own property. That's our choice because of our background. Not always do I agree with it because it's stressful sometimes. But then the other option is you go through a property manager, through a real estate. Now, there are some businesses, e.g. Oscar D'Souza and Dedicated Property Management, where that's his field. He specialises only in property management. And so people like that will be doing the negotiation on your behalf. So I'm employing Oscar with Dedicated Property Management to attend to my property and look after my investment property. He'll look after the rental. He'll advertise for tenants, and he will do all the things that are necessary on the owner's behalf. He does not, I can assure you, and nor does any property manager, pocket whatever increase they do on the rent. That it does not happen. So we can just cancel that myth absolutely. And those that may be banding that around on social media, forget it, because it's not even close to the truth. Property managers charge a fee for their work, like every business and like everybody that's in business. That's what they do. They charge a fee for what they do, and it's all different. Certainly in Oscar's case, his fee structure is different to what others are, and so it goes. But check that out. If you're a landlord, check that out. If you're a tenant, unfortunately, your options are either going via private landlord or going through a property manager specialist to rent a property. So they're the two options. And whatever occurs with regard to that, you pay your rent, and from that rent come all the fees that the landlord pays. Obviously, they are built into your rent, but that's how the system works, and that's how it's worked forever and a day. It's nothing new, but it's a market, it's a supply and demand. And if you're concerned about why rentals are increasing, it's all to do with demand. That's just how things work. It's just that's just how economics is. And I'm sure you've all learned that at school. So that's a myth buster. The other myth buster that I have is with regard to what was the other one? There was another one I had. I can't remember what it is now. I wrote it down. How silly of me. I'll think of it. The other thing that I did want to touch on was special conditions, something that I caught up with this week, obviously in my profession, but also I provide consulting services to clients and assist them with the structure of contracts. And I know it's frustrating at times, and particularly at the moment where, you know, I've got several scenarios where you've got more than one property linked. So you've got property number one being sold, and the seller of that is buying property number two. The seller of number two is buying property number three, and so it goes. And you've got this chain. You've got 3 or 4 different people or 3 or 4 different properties all lined up, all waiting to settle, and they've got to settle simultaneously. You have one glitch or one hold up in any way, shape or form, it can impact on the whole process. And of course, what's happening at the moment is we're entering now December. We're entering the Christmas period. Please, please, please be conscious and be open with your real estate agent as to timeframes. I spoke to a bank manager again today. In fact, I spoke to about 3 or 4 bank managers today for different reasons. But all of them are saying it's not all they're doing. As much as we like bank bashing at times, you need to be conscious of the timeframes associated with your contracts. And as much as, and with all due respect to the real estate fraternity, as much as the real estate agent is keen to do and get this job done or this settlement done at a certain time because of these other settlements, we need to be conscious of what you can achieve. And I talk with complete straight down the line honesty that you need to be conscious of your timeframes. Do not even entertain 14 or 21 days for finance approval. You're probably looking at more like 42. Now, that sounds like a long way away, and it's probably not exciting for a seller who's gone and bought another property and is hoping to settle, and the people after that are trying to do the same thing. But you've got to be realistic. And I just can't emphasize that enough, because we've just seen it. And I think the worst part about that is that then we as a settlement agent, or we as an advisor, or whatever it may be that your role is, or our roles are, it creates a lot of anxiety when you've then got to go back to the seller, or you've got to go back to the buyer, and their expectations because of what's on the contract going, this is not achievable. You're going to have to get an extension. The problem with that, even so, is that all of a sudden, if the seller turns around and says, well, I'm not going to give an extension, rightly or wrongly, then you've got a problem, because then you're under pressure, and that's when the stress comes in. We're entering Christmas, we're entering the festive season, and I'm not making excuses, but the fact being is it's busy at the best of times in December. You've got limited days, even though it's a handful of days of Christmas. People go on holidays and so it goes. It's a busy time on top of a busy market. So please be conscious of that. And if you've got any questions, ask your settlement agent, contact TV here. You can get access through our social media pages, or you can get my mobile through Champion-based settlements. But speak to your real estate agent and then ensure that you get those right, because it's so, so important, as are the special conditions on your contract. And if you are buying a property and you're relying on the sale of another property, ensure that you have those two contracts linked. Ensure that you've got each property and each contract subject to the sale and settlement of each other, just to ensure, because your settlement agent is not a mind reader. And all of a sudden we find, oops, hang on, what are you talking about? Oh, yeah, I'm buying something else. That is very, very, very important. So ensure that you do that. Hey, listen, I hope that really helpful. I just thought I didn't think I'd be this long, but I get carried away at times. But I hope that was really helpful with some of the information we provided. Faye, I'll ensure that I get back to you. And in fact, we will ensure we actually do an episode on strata titles. It is on the drawing board. We've got so many topics, but we really would enjoy you sending us any information you have as far as or suggestions you want. If you want a particular topic you'd like us to discuss, we look forward to Oscar being on board next week. We should have our guest on board next week. But in the meantime, have a great week. Enjoy what it is you're doing, and more importantly, if you're out there in the property world, be conscious of the things that you need to be conscious of. Be astute, be aware, and be smart. Have fun, and to all of you, stay safe. Look forward to seeing you next week. And I will now find, I'm not very well prepared because I'm on my own. I will now find